everyone, and welcome to my channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to draw some loose flowers, some loose leaves, and the main color is going to be in white. Painting white flowers on white paper can be a little bit tricky. The main problem with this is that the white flower tends to not pop out on the page because the page is white. Therefore, it's important to frame each flower with either other flowers or with leaves. I start by painting the middle sections of each flower, so the stamen section. Because I'm doing the 3 white flowers at the same time, I make sure that my paint is quite wet. The reason for this is so that just a small amount of the paint in that middle section, so the whites and the brown, so that it can bleed just a small amount into the petals. The colors I'm using for these stamens is yellow ochre as well as a little bit of Van Dyke brown. Now that I've finished the 3 stamens, I'll get started on the petals. Because of the lightness of the paint that I'm going to be using, you won't be able to see these petals that easily as I get started, but as I go along, you'll be able to see the details of each petal more. I'll be doing a series of thin petals. Each petal will be unique, and therefore nothing will be the same as all the others. I'll let the white page peep through on the majority of each of the petals as well. Also, each petal will be a little bit jagged, so I won't bring it to a point or a rounded tip. They'll all be a little bit different, and some will be almost as though they've been clipped or broken off. In nature, you don't always find perfect and pristine petals, and I'm trying to replicate that in my paintings. The colors that I've used to mix up this mixture for the petals is a lot of white, a medium amount of French grey, and a tiny amount of Van Dyke brown. In the end, it comes out to a really light grey color. Some of my petals will be butting up against others, and some will have tiny gaps between them. The perspective of the flower that I'm painting at the moment would be as if you were looking at a flower straight on. For the second flower, I'll carry on doing exactly the same as I did for the first. The only difference in this flower will be the perspective. When you're talking about perspective, you're talking about how you view the flower. So on this one, you'll be looking at the flower more from a side angle, whereas the previous one, you would be looking at the flower from a straight on angle. When I paint a side angle perspective, I start with the full petal sizes. This is the same as what I did in the first flower. Using the oval as my guide, I will make sure that I start at one end of the oval and do exactly the same thing with these petals to the other end of the oval. When I say oval, I mean the oval shape of the center section, so the stamens. From this point, I'll make smaller petals until they meet up smaller and smaller into the middle. I start on each end of the oval of the stamens, and as I go down in size, I'll eventually meet them both up in the middle as I'm doing now. My third flower is also from a side perspective, so I'll be doing that exactly the same way as I've just done the second flower. A few little flower buds. I'll use the same mixture that I used for the first 3 bigger flowers. You can put as many flowers and buds as you like. As I always say, this is about what makes your heart sing and what you love. So paint what makes you happy. While the paint is wet on the flower buds, I'll use a little bit of that yellow ochre that I used before, and I'll just put it right at the bottom where the stem will connect. By ensuring that the paint has not dried on those flower buds, what will happen when I touch it with the yellow is that it will bleed and bloom nicely throughout the flower. Sorry, I meant the flower bud. After you've finished with the yellow ochre, repeat the process, but this time use a little bit of the Van Dyke brown. Using a cat tongue brush now, what I'll do is start to make some more flowers, but using the yellow. I'll use the rounded triangle to make 2 or 3 petals and not much more than that. Scatter these flowers around the painting. As you can see, even though there's not much in the way of color on this painting yet, but you can see how those white flowers are already starting to pop off the page. The details are now starting to become more obvious with those white flowers as well. Next, I'll dab a little bit of green at the bottom of each of these flowers. I'll just use quite a thin round brush for this. I'll continue painting tiny little lines so that it forms a little bit of a point at the bottom, so it makes that little section that actually holds the entire flower together. I'm terrible with names and I've completely forgotten what that part of the flower is called. In order to get the green to bloom in the yellow paint, what I'll do is make sure that I only do a few flowers at a time, because if I do too many, then chances are that the paint will be dry before I get to the green. Now that my original 3 flowers are nearly dry, I'm just going to add a little bit more details to the middle section. I'll be using the same paint that I used to paint all 3 of the big flowers. You'll be able to see that there's just a little bit of that yellow and brown that's in the center that is bleeding through onto the details that I'm doing now. If I had done these details earlier on, that paint would have been far too wet and I would have had too much of a bleed, which is not what I wanted. Personally, the hardest part of watercolor painting so far for me is getting the timing right. Mastering the timing in watercolor painting is not as easy as I first thought it would be, but I persevered. All it is practice, 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 and a little bit more practice. Now it's time for the leaves. I'm going to be painting rather large, shaggy leaves. I use a very thin brush with long bristles so that I can get right into the corner of where those petals intersect or meet with the stamens. I like to use 3 brushes when I do this type of leaf. I use a thin liner with long bristles, a number 4 round, and I'm not too sure what number it is, but it's an angled brush that I use. You'll be able to see how I paint the leaves using these 3 brushes. As you'll be able to see that just in this one leaf, I've been putting through quite a variety of tones. The color that I'm using for the leaves is a mixture of greens, browns, and yellows. At this point, I'm not exactly sure what the ratios are in this green because I keep on adding and topping it up as I paint. In some paintings, I'll need the green to be a little bit more yellow or a little bit more brown, and then that's what I'll add. But then I don't go and clean the palette in between. I'll just go and tweak the next mixture for whatever it might be that I'm needing, whatever color I might need. When I paint shaggy leaves, not every section of the leaf will be joining. I make sure that I leave some white space to act as some highlights within the leaf. The white space also adds a little bit more detail and definition. As I proceed with the painting, I'll be adding these stems and more leaves as I need them. not much more I can say at this point in time by way of explanation, so I think I'll sign off speaking at the moment and let you watch the rest of the video in peace. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you got some value out of watching this video today. you.